Hopefully it works. All right, guys. Today we're going to start reviewing for the AP exam. We're going to go over some basics of the AP test. We're going to start Unit 1, going back pretty much to the beginning of the year, the global tapestry. And then over the next several days, we will review pretty much all of the units that we've had thus far. Some of you guys are taking the AP test, some are not, does not matter. Okay, for those of you taking the AP test, obviously it's going to be worthwhile because we're reviewing, we're getting ready for this thing. But even you guys not taking the AP test, first of all, we are going to take some grades over the review activities. So that's important. But also, if you're unfortunate and have to take the semester exam, this is doubling as your semester exam review. And for some of you guys, you absolutely need to do well in the semester exam. So there's value in paying attention either way. Um, every day we're going to go over different units that we've had. You do need to take just a little bit of notes. Does not need to be extensive. Okay, it can be pretty short because frankly, we've already taken a lot of notes over all this stuff before. The notes you're going to take, you'll put like Unit 1, jot down a few things that you know you need to study up. Maybe things that you forgot about. Maybe things that you need to search for in your notes at a later date. That's all I'm looking for. Okay, the next notebook check after the one that's due tomorrow, we do have a notebook check tomorrow, but the next notebook check, it's pretty much going to be over the stuff that we talk about the next week or so during review. Not many notes. It's pretty darn easy. If you submit it and show a little bit of effort, it's pretty much a gimme. So take advantage of it. It can benefit you, especially though if you're taking the AP exam. So news and notes before we get started on all that. First and foremost, DCA. You took it yesterday, or at least you should have taken it yesterday. If you haven't, please get that done. The average was a little bit less than normal. And given the time of the year, I get it. We're all burnt out. We're all tired. Trust me, I'm sick of this stuff too. Average was a 56, which sounds really, really bad. But you got to understand, for these sort of tests, we usually hover around 60, a little bit above, maybe a little bit below. And 60% on multiple choice in this class isn't that bad. So it wasn't terrible, but it certainly could be better. So the overall average, all my class is 56. What I do on our multiple choice test, anytime the average is below a 70, I will give everybody that many points back as kind of like the curve. So would have been 14 points. That just seemed kind of lame. Trying to help you guys out, I gave everybody 20 points. Now take a deep breath. When you look in Skyward, 20 points has already been added to it, okay? So if you're now at a 90, well, you got a 70, and that ain't bad. If you're at a 50, you had a 30, and that is bad, okay? If, with the 20 points already added, if you still have a grade below a 70, you can request a retake. All you got to do, either email me or talk to me after class. I'll jot down your name. Again, give you a little while to study and think about things, but I'm going to open the retake up on Monday. It'll probably be open all the way through Thursday. That's kind of what I'm thinking. You can do it whenever you get a chance. You will have an increased time limit, so hopefully that will help. And haven't seen the material before, hopefully you kind of know what to study. Again, you can only get it up to a 70. We're not going to do it where I take the 20 points off, let you retake it, and then put it back on because that just would make my brain explode. But you can get your grade up to a 70 for sure. Now, here's the deal. 70, yeah, it's not great. But we're going to have more extra credit opportunities this 6 weeks than we've ever had. I've already told you about the mock exams. You do the online mock exam, you complete the whole thing, that's 20 points. You come in person, that's 20 points. We've got one more AP classroom quiz that'll probably be worth maybe up to like 12 points. We'll still do the documentary review. That's a good 15 points. And I plan on adding at least one other thing. So the moral of the story is right now, if your grade looks terrible, well, that's the only grade in there, first of all. And second, there's opportunities to raise that moving forward. You just have to take advantage of it. I have not graded the project, which was due on Monday. I have not graded the SAQ, which was due on Tuesday. We've got a notebook check tomorrow that's pretty easy. It's just the Cold War notes and the Heimler's history video notes. Those grades will be in soon. I'm going to try to get to them this weekend, if not Monday. But just, if your grade's looking really bad right now, it's okay. There's only one grade in there, and we have opportunities to raise it. Speaking of AP exam prep, talked about the mock exams. I gave you the dates in the email. They're up there as well. The online one's going to open this Saturday morning. It's going to be open Saturday, Sunday, all the way up until 11:59 p.m. It's long. I'll give you like 3 hours and 15 minutes to do it. But if you get through the whole thing, you will get 20 points extra on your lowest test grade for those 6 weeks. You also will get kind of a breakdown of how you did, areas you can improve, and what your predicted AP score is. Same deal on the in-person exams. The dates are up there. The times are up there. That is also in the email I sent. That's another 20 points because it is a different test. Big thing is, though, you do have to sign up for that in advance. Aside from that, we are still doing the AP exam prep tutorials. We're doing them every Thursday, including today. They're going to run from 4:30 to 5:15. You can come in person. You can attend online. Not mandatory, but we're going to be looking at SAQ stuff today. So if that's something you struggle with, I highly encourage you to attend. So that's kind of where we're at for today. I've got a file I need you guys to open, the Unit 1 and 2 curriculum guide. Now we're going to be alternating between this and this little PowerPoint I created over Unit 1. But really the only one you need open yourself is the curriculum guide. And when you get into it, it'll look like this. So in your notebook, because for every unit, I want to see at least a little bit of notes. Doesn't have to be much at all, but a little bit. Go ahead and write Unit 1, Global Tapestry. As we're talking today and tomorrow, jot down a few notes. We start Unit 2, jot down a few notes. Again, you're going to need some notes over all the units that we cover over the next week or so. We'll look at the units and I'll show you how many there are and all that stuff here in a second. But I'm telling you, it doesn't have to be a lot because this is all stuff that you took a bunch of notes on earlier in the year. This is just you jotting some things down, things to kind of emphasize when you do study. So, world history, very expansive. Obviously, there's no way we could ever cover everything that's ever happened, okay? And the College Board especially, they have certain things they want us to stress because that's what's going to be on the AP exam. Okay, we have the advantage of them at least giving us a little bit of a heads up as to some of the very specific things you need to know. We as teachers and you as students find those things in the curriculum guide. Now, this is not a top secret. It's been on the College Board website the entire time. It's like 250 pages, so nobody ever checks it out except for teachers. But, unit by unit, it says, hey, this is what you need to know. And if it's not in there, if it's not even implied in there, it ain't going to be on the test. So really important when we post these unit guides, you breeze through them. They're real easy to read. We'll go over exactly how to read them here in a second. Keep this open. But now I'm going to switch over to my nice little PowerPoint here to kind of, introduce everything to you. So we are going to be talking about Unit 1 today, 1200 to 1450. It's the global tapestry. It's pretty much just who's running around and who are the prominent civilizations of this time period and kind of a little bit about each. Okay, tomorrow we'll also get into Unit 2. That is also 1200 to 1450, so they're going on at the same time. That's going to be about networks of exchange, trade between these various civilizations. But before we get into actual review, let's talk about the AP test itself. You got 4 big parts, okay? The total time is 3 hours and 15 minutes. And if you look at the parts and you look at the time limits, if you haven't put it together, that's why we do these sort of assessments. Our multiple choice, our SAQ, our LEQ, our DBQ, we're mirroring what's on the AP exam as close as we can. So part A, it's the largest part, the multiple choice. Okay, it is 55 questions, 55 minutes. This is 40% of your exam score. Now, this is tough, mainly because of the time limit. You really got to get into the habit of, reading through the documents and looking at the sources and the dates and reading the questions one time through, picking the best answer, eliminating the ones that you know are wrong, and moving on. You don't have time to agonize over anything. You just gotta keep going. All right. If you can emerge from the multiple choice with 60% of those 55 questions correct, you're sitting pretty. Okay, it doesn't mean that you can just blow off the writing. You can't do that. But as long as you write fairly decent and can pick up some points along the way, you should be in line for at least a 3. That's the hope. Okay. For those of you that don't know, on AP tests, you're ranked from 1 to 5. 3 and above, generally speaking, will get you college credit. In Texas, almost all the schools will accept 3 or above. If you want to get to like Harvard or some really prestigious school, they may, want a 5. They may want a 4. But 3 and above, that's generally where we're looking at. So if you can emerge from multiple choice 60% correct, you're doing okay. Next part are the SAQs. It is 20% of your exam, 40 minutes to get it done, 3 questions. Now you're probably saying, wait a minute, we do 3 questions all the time. We do it in 12 minutes. They're messing with you. It is really 3 sets of questions. So like when we do an SAQ, that's 1 set of questions. You're going to do 3 sets in 40 minutes. I give you 12 minutes for 1 set. So it kind of adds up to 40 either way. You're going to be fine. Okay. You're going to be more than fine. I think you can manage your time effectively here. Now, the way it's kind of organized, you've got your 3 sets. They actually give you 4. The first 2 you have to do. Okay. The first one will be like a secondary source, some historian talking about something. Maybe a picture, maybe a map. It could be almost anything. Okay. It's going to have a stimulus. Which actually those, even though we haven't done a whole bunch of them, they're some of the easier ones. The primary source is going to be question number 2. Again, it's something from a historical time period, maybe a painting, maybe a quote, who knows? And then you'll have some questions that follow. Question 3 and 4, you choose one or the other. Okay, so just like the other day when we did our SAQ, you want to start off by scanning through all the sets of questions, all the questions. You want to identify between 3 and 4, which one are you not going to worry about? Then you need to prioritize. Which one do I feel the best about? That's always the one you want to start with. That way, if you run out of time, you're at least getting some points out of this. You're going to do your 3 sets of SAQ questions. 40 minutes later, they're going to call the time. Boom, close the book, seal that part. Go take like a little 10-minute break, eat some pretzels, get some water. You're going to come back, and they're going to give you the material for the DBQ and your LEQ. You've got 2 relatively long essays you got to write. They don't have to be super long, but long essays. The DBQ, that is more valuable. Okay, they are going to give you 25% of your exam score. It's going to be based on how you do on the DBQ. You got 100 minutes total. You decide which one you do first, but always do the DBQ first because it's the more valuable, and it's more time consuming. Again, you've got to read through the documents. You got to kind of plan out how you're going to use those documents to support your central argument. That does take time. So the way that they break it down, they recommend that you spend a full hour on the DBQ, and then you spend about 40 minutes on the LEQ. The LEQ is the other type of essay we've done, the one without the documents. The good thing is, it's the least valuable thing. It's only 15% of your grade, and you get to choose from 3 prompts. Okay? You want to choose the prompt you know the most about, or God forbid, you don't know anything about any of them. Choose the prompt that's set in the time period you know the most about. Because if you even know anything about the time period, you can kind of BS your way towards a few points, maybe, hopefully. So that's what it's going to be. 3 hours, 15 minutes. Now, this is going to be Monday. It's going to be, not this Monday, Monday, May the 10th. Starts at 8 a.m. You have to be here by at least 7:30 because we got to check in, we got to do all that stuff. You roll in like 8:15, you ain't taking the test. You're rolling at 8:01, I don't know if you're taking the test. So you got to be here early. Make arrangements now. If you need a ride, make arrangements. That being said, some people, I'm not talking to anybody in particular in here, but I'm talking to all my kids because I'm recording this. Some people paid to take the AP test. They have no business taking the AP test. Let me explain. If you study and you put forth some effort, and yeah, you're going to have to study outside of school. You got to pay attention to what we do here, but you got to study outside of school. But if you do those things and work for it, every single one of you can pass this test. It is totally doable. It's a little tricky, but that's something we're going to talk about the next couple of weeks. But if you're willing to put the work in, absolutely take the test. But if you know that you're not going to study, you know you're just sitting here every day, breathing air, not really paying attention. The only way you're passing, if you're passing, is because you cheat on everything. there is no reason for you to take this test because you're going to sit there and be miserable for 3 hours and 15 minutes when you could be at home asleep. So if you paid for it, hey, that's your right. Come take the test. But you need to be realistic. You're not going to roll in there having put forth very little effort at all this year and like luck into college credit. It don't work like that. If you're willing to work for it, yeah, sure. But if you're not, stay at home. That's my advice. Take that for what it's worth. All right, so here's our units. We've got 9 units of instruction. Today, we'll just kind of scratch the surface. We'll talk about Unit 1, the global tapestry. Tomorrow, we'll finish up Unit 1. We will also get to Unit 2, networks of exchange. I think we can get through that pretty quick. Then most of the rest of next week, it's going to be kind of like today. We're going to tackle unit by unit some of the key ideas, some of the key information you need to know. We're going to be using PowerPoints and maps and stuff like that, but we're also going to be flipping back and forth to the curriculum guide. Now today I'm going to read a bunch of the curriculum guide. Other days I may just refer to it. You may want to glance over it. But the curriculum guide is going to be very, very important if you're taking the AP exam because that is what it's based on. So we've got 9 different units. We have 4 different time periods. Okay, 1200 to 1450. Everything before 1200, even the stuff we talked about, you don't got to worry about. It's not going to be on the test. 1200 to 1450. 1450 to 1750. 1750 to 1900, and then 1900 to the present. Now, here's the deal. You got 4 time periods. I know it's very difficult to remember every single detail of every single civilization, all the vocabulary, all the developments. That is nearly impossible. Okay, remembering a whole bunch of really hard specific dates, that's really, really difficult to do. That's not what I'm asking. What I want you to do is be familiar with the overview of the time period. If I say, hey, the Mongols or Columbus or something like that, at least know where they fit in here, okay? For each time period, you want to know, first, who are the main groups of people we're talking about, and what are some of the big trends, things that just about everybody's doing. Because if you can learn to recognize that, guys, the AP test gets a lot easier. One of the ways that the College Board messes with you, on the multiple choice, they'll put like a quote or something, this is from 1250, okay? Always want to look at where it's from, when it's from. You'll read the question, and you'll look at the answer choices, and you'll be like, man, they all look correct. But when you really look at it, well, this one's talking about Vasco da Gama going around Africa. Wait a minute, that's not till the 1500s. Well, if this is coming from 1250, that can't be right. Again, periodization, learning kind of more or less what time period all these various things happened, who was around, some of the big events, you can start eliminating answer choices very easily. Okay, most of the multiple choice questions, there's at least one answer you can get rid of just based on that alone. Sometimes you can get rid of 3. I mean, that's how commonly they use this to try to trick you. Just knowing more or less the sequence of events, more or less when certain events fit into our 4 time periods, that can save you a lot of trouble. Also in the writing, you know, the SAQs, the LEQs, maybe, especially like on the LEQ, maybe you don't know much about the topic, but if you more or less kind of know some of the stuff going on in the time period, write about it. I mean, at the very least, you can get your context point. You might accidentally slip into more points. So again, periodization, that's one of the big things that we're going to be trying to build moving forward. Last thing on this slide. Notice that the periods are not all weighted equally, okay? Periods, or units, I should say, 3 through 6, I mean, man, that could be 60% of the exam right there. It could be. So when you're studying, especially like the night before, focus on those units, okay? At least a little bit more so than like unit 1 and 2. Because in all likelihood, there's going to be more questions based on those units than any other. So with that being said, let's actually review a little bit. Let's get just a little bit into Unit 1, the global tapestry, 1200 to 1450. So a little bit of context. We love the word context. Before 500 CE, many classical powers like Rome, Han China, and Gupta India dominated. However, between 500 and 1200, these powers fell and the regions became decentralized. You're not going to have anything about the Roman Empire, nothing on the test. That's all before 1200. But this does give you some background in that there were a lot of really big, stable empires before 1200, but it's not really until 1200 that you start to see more and more new empires really come to fruition. In those in-between years, it's kind of chaotic. You don't have a whole lot of large centralized states. That starts to change in the year 1200. By 1200, these regions are once again unifying. Europe, China, South Asia, and regional powers in Africa and the Americas are both building on their past by infusing traditional religions and philosophies into their societies while also advancing economically and technology. You need to know some of the major trends. Okay, we'll get into who's all around here in a second and some of the big time events. But think about things true of this time period that just about everybody's into. Okay, that's part of periodization. So as far as social trends, you start to see the increased use of very stable social hierarchies. Just about all of the different prominent civilizations of this time period, they have a hierarchy in society. It's one of the ways that they stabilize things. Politically, you see an increase in state control and bureaucracies, more centralized government. That word bureaucracy will probably show up more times on the AP exam than any other. Okay, it's a weird sounding word, but we've used it all year. Okay, all a bureaucracy is, at least in this context, it's a government that's pretty elaborate, pretty formalized, has a bunch of different offices. You got the tax collectors, you got the people involved with irrigation, water, you got law enforcement, you got the military, you've got your political advisors, so on and so forth. Okay, you see pretty much all the governments that we're going to talk about have some form of bureaucracy, and it seems to get a little bit more elaborate as years pass on. As far as interaction with the environment, they all, to some extent, change environments. They build canals to ease with trade and travel. They find new methods of agriculture that make food production a little bit easier, especially as populations are rising. You start to see more and more cities spring up. 1200 to 1450 is a time period of a lot of exchange, okay? Silk Road trade, Indian Ocean trade, Trans-Saharan trade. That is really booming at this time, probably more than any other. So, of course, you're going to see more people, you're going to see more cultural diffusion, you're going to see the growth of cities. And because trade's so important to these various groups, I mean, they're all building up their infrastructure. They're building roads, they're building bridges. We already talked about canals to make trade and travel all the easier. Okay, you can connect your territory. You can also connect to distant territories, and get access to the trade routes. As far as culture, religions and philosophies built upon past teachings and spread across state borders. During this time period, it's not so much like you have a bunch of new religions. Okay, that's earlier on. All right, same religion, same main religions for the most part, but they are spreading wider than before, further than before. As they spread. And we're mainly talking about like Christianity and Buddhism and Islam. They inevitably change a little bit. Okay, especially those three religions, they all proselytize. They want to get more and more followers. When they go to these new territories, they just inevitably embrace some of the local characteristics. We call that syncretism, when beliefs kind of come together to form something at least a little bit new. As far as economy, it's all about trade. Trade increased urbanization. It created a much more interconnected world than you'd ever seen. And as far as technology, there's a lot of developments during this time period. Most of them developed, around trade. Especially in China, you get the compass. You get, the use of paper money for the first time. Eventually, not so much via trade, but it does spread. You get gunpowder during this time. As far as, like maritime navigation technology, new ship designs, the increased use of lateen sails, the spreading of an older technology, the astrolabe. I mean, all those things are diffusing more as people get more and more connected. Now, for each unit, I'm going to give you kind of a few events. And this is nothing more than to kind of give you an image of some of the stuff, some of the people involved during this time period. You can copy it down if you want. You don't have to. It's going to be here. It's on Canvas. But these are the sort of things that are happening. These are the sort of events you want to associate with this time period of 1200 to 1450. First, a little bit before the time period, 1185, Japan installs its first shogun. Japan during this time period, very similar to Europe, it's a feudal society. in which the person in power, in this case the shogun, gives out grants of land. That way people will be loyal to him. It's what we call a decentralized sort of government, because even though the shogun, or in Europe, the king, is technically in charge, the day-to-day governance of territories within that larger unit, it's up to these different lords and things like that. We'll get more into feudalism when we go into Europe. The Delhi Sultanate takes power in India in 1206. Didn't talk a whole lot about them. The reason that we do need to emphasize them is they're the first Muslims to really be prominent rulers in India. That rivalry between Hinduism and Islam in India, it goes all the way back to this point. 1215, King John of England signs the Magna Carta, one of the first documents to officially kind of limit the power of the king, limit the power of the government. This is when you start to see the king start to share power with Parliament. And then years and years later, England and many other places transition to a full-blown constitutional monarchy. This is kind of one of the first steps in that. Everybody remembers this guy, Genghis Khan, founder of the Mongol Empire. He dies in 1227. The Mongols are active during this time. And if you can remember that, the Mongols interacted with so many different groups of people, usually killing them, that you can kind of start to get an idea of who all else was out there. For instance, in 1258, the Mongols conquered the Abbasid Caliphate. Leading up to this period, the Abbasids, they were the main Muslim power in the Middle East and North Africa. Okay, by the time we get to 1200, they're kind of on their last legs. They've been replaced by other Muslim groups, not Arab, but Turkish groups from Central Asia. But still, the Abbasids do set the tone. They're the innovators. They're the ones that are all about the pursuit of knowledge and trade. They really facilitated a lot of trade. Those are things that other Muslim empires will also emphasize later on. China's Song dynasty falls in 1279. They fall to the Mongols, who create the Yuan dynasty. Dante, a leader of the European Renaissance, dies, 1321. I don't care if you know who Dante is, but this is during the Renaissance, which is a pretty broad period, but it's really during the Renaissance, and this is like after the Crusades and everything, that you see a sort of cultural rebirth in Europe. Because leading up to that, a little bit before 1200, a little bit earlier, a couple hundred years, Europe was still going through the Dark Ages, when education and art and architecture really wasn't heavily emphasized. Well, during the Renaissance, that's starting to change. And one of the reasons it changes is more and more trades coming into Europe. Mansa Musa of Mali makes his pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324. The Aztec found Tenochtitlan, 1325, the beginnings of that empire that will be one of the first prominent empires in the Americas to fall once the Spanish show up in the late 14 and early 1500s. And finally, 1337, the start of the 100 Years' War. Didn't get into it much, but for 100 years, Great Britain and France fought each other. Deep-seated rivalry. Thing is, the reason this is important, not that the war itself isn't important, but the reason that we need to know about it is it's really after this war that you start to see feudalism die out and people more associate themselves as a part of, a modern country. Like we're French, we're English. Because before that, even though you had a king, even though you were a part of this territory, those feudal obligations, that was more at the forefront of your mind. So these are some of the groups that are around during this time period. I'm not a huge fan of this map. It gets a little confusing. I think when we see the individual maps of different regions, it'll make a little bit more sense. So the main players in Africa, Northern Africa, in the Middle East, Central Asia, various groups of Muslims. You've got the Abbasids, they're on their way out. Really, most the Muslim powers during this time period are of Turkic origins. Such as the Seljuk Turks. They're the ones that seize Israel and kind of instigate the Crusades. The Mamluks, they started off as slaves, but they kind of formed their own caliphate of sorts in Egypt. You really look throughout this territory, the Timurids. We didn't really call them that, but those are the Mongols that conquered the Abbasids. Many of them converted to Islam. You look elsewhere in Africa, we got a lot of civilizations, a lot of kingdoms and city-states really that are gaining a lot of success due to their location, along trade routes. Mali being a great example, a hub of the gold salt trade. This is where Mansa Musa was from. You look at the Swahili coast, various city-states that really got rich off of Indian Ocean trade. South Asia, there's a bunch of different groups, but the Delhi Sultan is the one to know. The first group of Muslims to rule in India. Southeast Asia, there's like a dozen different kingdoms and empires, and you're never going to remember all their names because they're hard to say, they're hard to read. We'll look at them probably tomorrow, but the key to remember, they also, like the Swahili city-states, their kind of bread and butter, if you will, was their location, okay, along the Indian Ocean trade routes. They kind of all stabilized their society, also really kind of identifying with one religion. Whether it's Hinduism or Buddhism, or in the case of what will become Indonesia, obviously Islam. East Asia, you got the Song dynasty, then you got the Mongols, the Yuan dynasty, then you get the Ming dynasty. You've got Korea, which is very much in China's sphere of influence, gets a lot of their culture from China, as does to a lesser extent Japan. Then on the other side of the world, we got some American civs. You've got the Mississippians, you've got some groups like the Mesa Verde up in what is now the United States, but the main ones to know, especially at the beginning of the time period, the Mayan city-states here in the Yucatan Peninsula, the Inca Empire, very small at this point, growing up in the Andes, and eventually towards the end of this time period, you get the Aztecs as well. Now, we're only going to get through this slide and one more, but now we're going to switch over to the curriculum guide, okay? And the reason is this kind of gives you a good visual representation, but I want to show you what the curriculum guide's all about. It's not the most exciting read, but that's kind of a good thing. So I'm going to break it up, you know, via units. It's going to be all time periods. Like unit 1 and 2 are together because it's 1200 to 1450. I'll put unit 3 and 4 together because it's 1450 to 1750. Okay, those are the units, but then there's like the subtopics. So the global tapestry. Who all is out there? What are they doing? What are they like? A lot of it has to do with how they're consolidating control. It's all about state building. We'll start off talking about East Asia. That's probably all we'll get through today. We're talking mainly China. Tomorrow we'll get into Dar al-Islam. We'll talk about some of the developments in South and Southeast Asia. We'll talk about state building in the Americas. We'll also talk about state building in Africa. We will then kind of wrap it up in Europe, see what they're up to during this time period. And finally, and this isn't one we're going to go into in a whole lot of depth, but as we're talking about these groups, just think in what ways that they're similar. I mean, what are some things that they're all more or less doing? Because again, if you can remember that, you've got a sense of the time period. So go ahead and scroll down with me. Let me show you how to read this thing, how to study it. These curriculum documents you need to read over. You need to look over all the units, okay? It's not a whole lot, all right? They leave it kind of almost purposely bare. That way you can draw some conclusions, you know, like what exactly do I need to know? But if you look closely, I mean, it's all there, you know, it points you in the right direction. So within each topic, like this one's developments in East Asia, it'll always start off with a thematic focus, okay? Might be governance, might be cultural development, might be economics. You can read that maybe one time, but it's always going to be the same stuff, right? Anytime you see governance, it's going to say that word for word. Okay, so governance, how are these people governing? How are they politically uniting their territory? What you need to read is the learning objective, the historical development, and then if you see any illustrative examples, you need to at least be familiar with those. So we're going to read through some of this today. Tomorrow, we'll just kind of glance at this stuff. I'll leave the reading up to you. I'll more or less just refer to it. But let's look at this. So learning objective, starting in East Asia, we're talking about the Song dynasty. Explain the systems of government employed by Chinese dynasties and how they developed over time. So this learning objective, you just got to kind of know how they organized their society, but more importantly, how their government ruled, how it was organized, how they staffed it. Okay, getting a little bit more depth over here in historical developments. Empires and states in Afro-Eurasia and the Americas demonstrated continuity, innovation, and diversity in the 13th century. This included the Song dynasty of China, which utilized traditional methods of Confucianism and an imperial bureaucracy to maintain and justify its rule. On the AP exam, maybe you come across a quote from the Song dynasty. And in it, they're talking about, you know, how they choose people to work in their government. And they talk about people having to take these civil service tests. Literally, one of the answer choices could be continuity, using Confucianism to staff their bureaucracy. I mean, a lot of times they use the language from the curriculum guide to make their answers, to make their questions. So the more you look this over, I mean, the more this stuff will just kind of get associated in your mind. But yeah, on this, clearly you need to know a little bit about Confucianism. We're going to talk about that here in a second. Obviously, you know, some specific details are necessary over the Chinese bureaucracy. Next part's culture. Like I said, it's always going to more or less be the same when you look at the themes. Pay attention to learning objective, historical developments. Explain the effects of Chinese cultural traditions on East Asia over time. So first, Chinese cultural traditions continued and they influenced neighboring regions. You got to remember, China thinks of themselves as the Middle Kingdom. They are the dominant civilization in East Asia for most of history. They have the best access to trade. They have the best technology. And because of that, a lot of the surrounding territories kind of adopted a lot of their culture. Okay, some of those territories entered into a tributary relationship where they would pay off the Chinese, but by doing that, you know, they got their protection, they got linked in with their trade network. I mean, that's what they're saying here, you know, and in places like Korea, to a lesser extent Japan, great examples of that. Confucianism is kind of the homegrown ideology of this area, but Buddhism is also a really big deal. Remember, Buddhism originates in India, and over years and years, it makes its way to East Asia, traveling along the Silk Road, but inevitably, as it travels, it changes. Then finally, explain the effects of innovation on the Chinese economy over time. The economy of Song China became increasingly commercialized while continuing to depend on free peasant and artisanal labor. Commercialized. There's a lot of business there. They're making a lot of stuff, manufacturing, silk and porcelain and iron and steel, some for domestic use, but mainly to export. Remember, China historically, I mean, it's the eastern end of the Silk Road. That's where a lot of different nations want to get goods from because they've got things that other people don't. Luxury goods like silk, some other inventions. And that kind of continues here. The economy of Song China flourished as a result of increased productive capacity, expanding trade networks, and innovations in agriculture and manufacturing. So these are the illustrative examples. And this is where you kind of find a lot of vocabulary, some really basic things that you need to know. So first bit of information, and it deals with Confucianism, filial piety. You got to know what that is. That is absolutely essential. It's the first thing here that they want you to know. Confucianism, this is an aspect of Confucianism, but you got to remember Confucianism is very hierarchical. Okay, Confucianism comes out of a time when China was at war and, you know, no real unified dynasty came in. And then eventually the Han come in and set things straight. But Confucianism, it's all about establishing that stability. And they believe the way to do that is reinforcing the social hierarchy. Everybody's got a role to play in society. Everybody's got a superior that they should defer to, that they should obey. Kind of weird, but they said if everybody kind of knows their role, literally, society will be well organized. It will be orderly. Okay, that's a big part of Confucianism. Well, part of that is this concept of filial piety. And in general, it's kind of like respect for your elders, but specifically like respect for your male elders, because Confucianism is pretty patriarchal. But filial piety, the best way to see it is like in the family unit. Okay, traditional Chinese family, you got a father, you got maybe a son, you got a daughter, you got the wife. The son, daughter, and wife, they are supposed to look up to and essentially serve the father. Okay, not serve exactly, but obey. You know, they need to love and obey and never bring dishonor to his house. Okay, and the father's there, you know, to work and bring honor to the house and ultimately protect his family. Okay, and if everybody kind of defers to the father, he's going to make the decisions. You're going to follow him because, again, in this relationship, he's the superior. Well, you can take that further and extend it to society, where the emperor's the father. And Confucius says, hey, he's got the mandate of heaven. He was chosen by, you know, the gods. You know, you see something like that a lot of times throughout history. But if he behaves like a father and the people behave like the sons and wives and daughters, then society will be well organized. He'll maintain the mandate of heaven, and you won't have all this craziness going on. Confucianism is a big sense of stability in China. Okay, It informed social hierarchy. It informed the hierarchy in their government. To get jobs in government, you had to know about Confucianism so you could pass those civil service tests. Now, that's the homegrown ideology. But over the years, other ideas get popular there too. Taoism, but especially Buddhism. One of the things that people do to kind of combat the popularity of Buddhism is they come up with a syncretic blended religion, because Confucianism kind of becomes a religion at this point, called Neo-Confucianism. And it's still Confucianism, okay? It still has all the tenets of Confucianism, but it does become somewhat religious when it kind of combines some elements of Buddhism and Taoism as well. Again, this is more just to kind of reinforce the stability of Confucianism, New Confucianism, if you will. Confucianism, again, hey, what do you know? Confucian traditions, of both respect and expected deference from women. That means women, the wife's supposed to obey the husband. If the husband's dead, then the oldest son, he's the head of the household. It's the idea that a woman should defer to her husband or her father, because they theoretically know best. Again, it's patriarchal. You need to know that. But that's, becomes a big part of East Asian culture, especially during these days. You also need to know that a lot of ideas from China, they do bleed out to the surrounding civilizations. They give the example of Heian Japan, which is kind of the phase before they become a shogunate, and Korea, which was very much under the sway of Chinese culture. Buddhism doesn't originate in China, even though it's really popular there. It doesn't originate in East Asia or Southeast Asia. It comes from India, okay? And it started traveling along the Silk Roads years and years earlier. But you need to know over time it changed. You got all sorts of different branches of Buddhism that believe slightly different things. Guys, originally Buddhism, not a religion. Nobody thought Buddha was a god. He was just this guy that taught people how to live their lives and to avoid suffering and ultimately come to some sort of inner peace, to come to enlightenment. They wanted to spread the idea, so they start sending out missionaries, along the Silk Road, and they gain converts. But what happens over years, as religion spread, they like I said, they adopt some of the local characteristics. That's how Buddhism becomes more of a religion. It's not like you're going to need to know every belief of the Theravadas, the Mahayanas, the Tibetans, but you need to know that's why you have the different branches. Now, just in case you're curious, like Theravada, they believe that Buddha's a god. Mahayana, they believe Buddha's a god, but there's some other deities too, little Hinduism. Tibetan Buddhism, very much like Theravada, but it's very central to that region of Tibet. They've got the Dalai Lama, who's like the reincarnation, I guess, of Buddha. Again, that's good to know, but you need to know why you have the branches to begin with. And finally, technological innovations. China comes up with a lot of stuff. Some of it doesn't seem important, but I'm telling you it is. Like champa rice. Now, this is something they get due to their tributary relationship with Vietnam, but it's quick maturing, it's drought resistant. All of a sudden, they got way more rice, way more food. They can export more, make some money. That's a good thing. But also, anytime you have an abundance of food, you're going to end up with an abundance of people. I mean, that's the start of China, really getting to the point where it is today, the most populated country on earth. Again, empires, states during this day, they're all interested in trade. They put money and time into trying to make trade a little bit easier. One example they mention a lot, the building of the Grand Canal. I forget if it's like 1,000 miles or something. It's huge. But it connects their two main rivers, the Yangtze, and the Yangtze's in the north and the Yongkiang in the south. And they also made a lot of stuff. Again, textiles, cloth, a lot of it silk, porcelain. Couldn't get that anywhere else. They were very adept at steel and iron production. Again, they are economically very stable because of trade, because of their innovations, because of their dedication to facilitating trade. So kind of show you how this works. These PowerPoint slides, it's an abbreviated form of what's in the curriculum guide. So I'm not every day going to read every single thing in the curriculum guide. We will refer to it here and there. But like when I'm going over Unit 1.1, the idea is you're going to follow along looking at the curriculum guide. That way you can kind of see why I'm saying what I'm saying. So East Asia is the first part of Unit 1, and it's mainly China. As far as the dynasties are concerned, we got the Song dynasty. They're replaced by the Yuan dynasty, the Mongols. They're replaced by the Ming. Song dynasty, big time into trade, the first to use paper money. Champa rice coming through tribute was a really big deal. Okay, so they did some good things, but they also did some really messed up things. You know, they're a patriarchal society. Neo-Confucianism is arguably even more patriarchal than old school Confucianism. That's when foot binding gets really popular, where you actually break the feet of young women and you wrap them and you put them in the shoes and you end up with that little hoof. Okay, that's not, you know, there's a reason behind it. It's to reinforce patriarchy, but it's also a status symbol. Remember, it's all about classes, because this lady, she don't got to work. The Yuan dynasty come in there, the Mongols. We'll spend a little time on the Mongols specifically, but you do need to know they largely adopt Chinese ways of doing things as far as how they rule. Marco Polo hung out with them. More on him in a minute. The Ming Dynasty, though, they're really important. They rebuilt the Grand Canal, made it even more effective. They're the ones that built the Forbidden City in Beijing to this day, but they're really known for Zheng He. He was that Chinese explorer that went throughout the Indian Ocean, you know, showing off the might and the wealth of China. He comes back home with all this cool stuff. He dies. The Chinese emperor that paid for it dies. The guy that takes over looks at all this stuff and says, it's all crap. China's still the best. We don't need to go explore. And all of these outside influences are just going to destabilize society. Remember, Confucianism is all about stability. He's the one that kind of closes them off. They still trade, but it's much more limited than it was before. They're not looking outside themselves very much. And it's one of the reasons they start to stagnate. We'll get more into Japan later, but you do need to know a lot of their culture is at least somewhat influenced by Chinese, so is Korean. And again, know the belief systems. Confucianism's the big one. Neo-Confucianism is the same thing, but it's more of a religion, and it does combine elements of Buddhism and Taoism. And just know, rather than know all the different beliefs of these different branches, understand why. As Buddhism traveled and went to new populations and they're trying to convert the masses, new things got added. Syncretism, you know, a combining of beliefs. It's just a natural byproduct of movement. So, tomorrow we'll move at a faster pace because we won't have to talk about all the basics of the AP exam. We are going to get through Unit 1. We're going to get through Unit 2 as well. Unit 2 is the same time, 1200 to 1450. Whereas Unit 1 is just all these different groups of people, Unit 2 is how they exchange goods with each other, along with everything else. We will go through this kind of similar stuff for the next several days. Again, take some notes over each unit. Should be pretty easy. And after we're done with the content, then we're going to focus more just on skills, getting ready for the AP exam.